Well, thank you all for joining us for this webinar, and for any of those of you who are here with us in person. We appreciate you making the time. My name is Brock Dittis. I'm with the Oregon Department of Education, Pupil Transportation and Fingerprinting Unit, and we are here today with representatives from DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, and also to my left, this is Candace Pelt, our Assistant Superintendent of Student Services. So over here in orange, I've got Bryce. Bryce is the Driver Programs Manager at DMV. Hi, Bryce.
Hello.
And then over here on my far right, this is Nick Hopper, and he is the Third Party Programs Compliance Coordinator at Department of Motor Vehicles. Hello.
Hey.
So we are here, and do you mind passing me that little clicker real quick? Let's go through. I've got a couple of slides here, but today we're here to talk about the changes that are coming. Many of you work in pupil transportation operations of one kind or another, whether that's a school district or a school bus contracting company. And all of you need drivers. You need drivers, and you have third-party examiners, which is why you've tuned in to hear about how that program is changing. I'll give you just a brief overview. So again, if you haven't met me before, my name is Brock Dittis, and I'm in the position that TJ Crockett once held. He was here earlier in the year. He's moved on to a different employer, and so I am here. And we're going to talk a little bit again about the DMV programs and how those are changing for you. So, Nick, do you mind pressing the, maybe just click on the PowerPoint presentation there. Thank you. There we go. So this is a chart that kind of describes a little bit about the process you go through when you find a new driver and how you get there. As you know, it would be nice if you could just find a person and put them right in the driver's seat, but there are many reasons that we shouldn't do that. This is the kind of the process that a new driver goes through. So we start with a good thing, we end with a good thing, and there are many challenging steps, depending on who you're working with, different levels of challenge that you may encounter. But as you can see, we start with a new driver candidate. That's a good thing. Someone says they want to work for you, that helps you get closer to your goal. First of all, they need to pass a federally required DOT physical examination. So that person needs to go to a doctor. The doctor needs to sign off and say, we think this person's healthy enough to be a commercial driver. From there, DMV controls the licensure process. So the commercial learner's permit is what they need to learn in a commercial vehicle. So they need to take the knowledge test, used to be the written test, now it's on a computer at the DMV field office. And they need to obtain that card before they can begin training. For them to get a school bus certificate, which they need to operate a school bus in the state of Oregon, they need to have 15 hours of ODE approved behind the wheel instruction. So one of our behind the wheel instructors who's gone through our class must be there doing the work. That is controlled by ODE, and that is how they can fulfill the requirements to get their school bus certificate. From there, they have to go and take a third-party exam. Generally, in our situation, we're working with school bus drivers. You have third-party examiners at your locations, which is probably why you're tuned in here, or you're interested in having one at your location. So that is something that is controlled by DMV. That's a program that is shifting fully to their control here at the end of May and starting in June 2019. So the commercial driver license is what they need to drive a school bus on their own without a trainer with them, and that is something that they must complete. Once they've done all of these things, then they are an approved driver behind the wheel driving a school bus at your operation. And again, that's one more good thing. So what's changing in that process is why we've invited the folks from DMV to come and join us today. So those changes, I'm going to pass the clicker over to Nick here, and Nick's going to give us a little bit of information about what is changing. So there you go, Nick.
Hello, everybody. So basically, the current structure for CDL skills testing as it pertains to school bus operators in the state of Oregon, we currently, through our DMV third-party programs, we have direct relationships with the Oregon Department of Education as a testing business. They then basically subcontract with the school districts and the private bus companies around Oregon to provide the service for testing. And currently, that's kind of at the heart of what we're trying to work through, what we're trying to kind of unravel a little bit, because while both DMV and ODE are crucial to this process through the school bus certification and the skills test piece, We really should be contracting directly with school bus companies and school districts. This is what the future skills test model looks like. As you see, both DMV and ODE are still present and part of that. ODE will continue to oversee the school bus driver training certification and skills test examiner training portions. DMV will still be responsible for the CDL skills testing and have direct contracts with the different entities, the school districts and the private bus companies. What that means for school districts is you'll enter into intergovernmental agreements with DMV to provide testing services to function as a CDL third-party tester. You'll employ examiners who administer tests, and under that model, examiners may administer tests for other districts if certain conditions are met. And I'm going to ask Bryce to elaborate a little bit on that, if you would.
Yeah, one of the things that that we discovered recently is that we had some disconnects in the way the program was actually being administered and the federal and state regulations and laws around what we needed to do to have a legally compliant structure for CDL skills testing. So in these situations where we have small districts, particularly in rural areas that really don't have the need, desire, or infrastructure to support a third-party testing program, because, you know, if small district, if they have an examiner and that examiner only has to administer a test for a driver once every 2 or 3 years, they're not going to be doing enough or administering enough tests to stay proficient. So in those situations, they're going to, you know, those areas are going to need to have other options. So a larger district or one of the private bus companies in a larger geographic area that's relatively close by to some of these rural areas could potentially use their examiner on loan to these other geographic areas, these other districts that are smaller that don't have the ability to support their own examiner. In doing that, it's under federal regulation that the examiner has to be doing the work and test administration for a third-party testing entity. So an examiner needs to be doing it as part of their employment with their employer. So the employer needs to be a third-party tester. The examiner needs to be administering tests under their employment by that third-party testing entity, whoever their employer is, whether that's a private bus company or a school district. What we had going on in a few different areas in the past is examiners doing tests for other districts on the weekends or evenings or whatever, and not doing it as part of their employment with their employer, and that's something that can't continue to occur. So in the future state, some ways that we can make this legally compliant, there are a number of different ways to do this, but the district who employs the examiner can potentially bill this other district for the use of that examiner. And that would be a situation where the smaller district who needs a test administered would pay the employing district of the examiner for the use of that employee's time. That's one way to do it. Other ways to do it would be for that examiner to, if they have the desire and there's enough volume to justify it, a third-party skills test examiner functioning in ODE's program could potentially establish a second job with one of our private for-profit third-party skills testing entities, and they could administer tests under one of those third-party testers. The kind of last option for these individuals would be, once again, if there were enough demand and there were enough need for enough tests to make it worth their time and effort, an examiner in ODE's program could establish their own third-party testing business. That's assuming that their primary employer wouldn't have any problems with any conflict of interest, you know, in them having this second job that they would hold, operating and functioning as a third-party tester. And if an examiner wants to do that, there are a number of requirements that have to be met around insurance and bonding and all of those types of things, and entering into a direct contract versus an intergovernmental agreement with Oregon Department of Transportation, DMV. So as we go forward in this process, we'll certainly have the opportunity to discuss some of those options. We don't need to get into too many of the details today, but those are just some of the ways that we can kind of help meet that need. And there is a slide further on in the presentation that provides a little more detail about that, and I believe Candace is going to speak more to that.
And I'll just step in and just to clarify, you mentioned the insurance requirements, but that is the reason, insurance and liability are the reasons that someone would not be able to go out and do something on the weekend apart from their employment.
Correct, yeah. So the two biggest issues were insurance bonding as number one, and two, the federal requirement that the examiners be administering tests under their employment with a third-party testing entity under agreement with DMV or with the state driver licensing agency.
Thank you, Bryce. Here's some of the applicable references for some of the program requirements and really the information that's being leaned on for part of this change. It covers duties, obligations, responsibilities of third-party testing businesses. So the school districts and the bus companies would be pretty interested in some of this information, as some of these responsibilities as a testing business will be shifting to those folks. We've got Oregon Administrative Rule, Chapter 735, Division 60, which is the third-party program administrative rules for DMV, and then Title 49 CFR 38375, which covers the federal regulation side of things. Some of the information as it pertains to those is you'd enter into a testing agreement with us, ensure insurance and bonding coverage. We have to make sure that's there. Employ qualified examiners, ensure examiners properly administer tests, maintain test records, agree to inspection of records, evaluation of examiners, ensure third-party testing program is compliant with all state and federal regulations. So a lot of that stuff is stuff that you're already doing. Really, the focus is more shifting to the contract and the responsibilities directly with you and DMV.
Just a little elaboration again on the insurance and bonding. That's going to be heavily dependent on the nature of the entity. So as a private bus company that's privately held, the insurance and bonding absolutely has to be in place. The surety bond is basically needs to be taken out to set money aside in case we have to retest people who have been tested by an examiner who was not properly administering tests. That's what that money is designed to cover. If a unit of local government, let's say a school district or an educational service district, ESD, or some type of consortium, if they're covered by the Oregon Tort Claims Act and they meet the definition of a public body and they're self-insured and all of those types of things, they don't have to have the surety bond, and also wouldn't have to have insurance policy that they would need to provide to us. There may be large school districts out there that are entirely self-insured, and if that's the case, we just need the certification of self-insurance submitted to us and wouldn't need the insurance. So when we get, once again, farther down into the weeds and closer to actually executing the IGAs or the intergovernmental agreements or the contracts under the class special procurement we'll be doing with the bus companies and the transit entities, those statements of work and contracts and agreements are all going to go out to all of the entities who want to play in the space in the future, and you're going to get an opportunity to review them and see all of the specific details about what needs to be met, the requirements, and we can talk through what you need to do or what you don't have to do based on whether you're a private bus company or a school district.
So kind of go down the list, just high level, what's changing for you. Bus companies, school districts will contract directly with DMV, as we've said a couple of times now. Contracts and agreements, maximum term of agreements is 10 years. We've actually gotten to the point now where the initial term of the contracts are going to be shifting to 5 years rather than previously what we had in place every 2 years. So the application process that used to be in place where you'd fill out the applications as examiners every 2 years, that piece will be going away as your employees of those districts. Instead, we'll be executing contracts and agreements every 5 years with a renewal for up to a possibility of 10 years. Bus companies and districts will be responsible for maintaining requirements of third-party testing business, which is currently most of the work that you're doing now as far as the record stuff is required. The big difference being required insurance coverages and surety bonds, which Bryce just spoke to. Examiners, no application process, must be employed under an entity in a contract with DMV. And then, of course, the one test for CDL school bus certification will continue on at this time. Examination for profit, this is something we touched down on a little bit as well. Any skills test examiner who works for a district or bus company that wants to administer tests for their own personal gain or profit, would need to become a private third-party testing entity and enter into contract directly with us. Again, this speaks to insurance coverages in place that typically when you're operating outside the scope of your employment aren't present. So there's a real liability there. And that was kind of one of the things that was at the center of this issue and the need to separate these two. That opportunity will still be there for those folks. They'll just have to execute contracts directly with DMV. DMV third-party program staff support will shift all route approvals over. I know the current process, you'll submit routes through ODE. ODE would submit to DMV on your behalf, and we would follow that chain. You'll just be submitting those routes directly to DMV for approval. Any questions you have around systems entry, whether it be results, scheduling, anything along those lines, direct contact with DMV for that stuff as well.
And for anybody who's not familiar with systems, can you define what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So systems is an acronym because, you know, we love to live in those. Commercial Skills Test Information Management System. And what that is it's the AMVA platform that is in production for the country for examiners to enter test results and schedule tests. Once those results are entered into systems, if it's a passing result, DMV's computer system can retrieve that information for issuance purposes. Prior to systems, there used to be pieces of paper that were handed out. They'd take them into the DMV. That piece of paper would be what they would need to obtain their license. Now those results are directly communicated to that software. Any other questions you have around proper CDL test administration as it pertains to the test itself, you'll want to refer those directly to DMV third-party program support staff as well. Sometime in the next couple of years, school districts and bus companies will be required to modify skills tests administered for school bus drivers to comply with federal regulations. As far as we know, most of these changes are going to be minor. ODE and DMV will work together to try and help ensure that there's still only one test that's administered. But right now, the test that's being administered is kind of a hybrid of Oregon Department of Education school bus certification requirements and the federal requirements for taking a CDL skills test. The two of them have been converged so that we can only administer one test to prospective drivers rather than having to conduct two different tests. And that's going to still be the goal and continue to be the goal. But as a result, getting to that point to obtain compliance with the federal regulations, we are going to have to make some adjustments to the test over the next couple of years.
Elaborate on this, and especially given the current news a little bit, so they know. Something recently that has come up is, so AMVA is the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, and currently federal regulations state that a CDL skills test has to be comparable to the AMVA model or be pre-approved by FMCSA if it's going to deviate. So we were, our model test we've been using here in Oregon, we've never gotten FMCSA pre-approval, and it's not exactly the same as the AMVA test. So FMCSA has kind of interpreted their word comparable to mean exact. So we have some findings from our annual program review with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, where they're kind of calling us out for having deviations from the model AMVA test. However, AMVA is currently working on changes to that model test. And in many ways, those changes are bringing their model test more in line with what Oregon has been doing.
So we're ahead of the game then.
Yeah. So what this is actually going to look like, we don't know yet, but there's a high probability that a lot of the things that we originally had thought we would be needing to change, maybe we won't. And maybe we'll actually end up needing to change some other things that we didn't anticipate. Like one of the things they're seriously considering is, well, an alternative or some significant changes to the basic control skills or the backing exercises. So what actually comes out of this and or what FMCSA will approve for us, we don't know yet, which is part of the reason why we have this, you know, within a couple of years, because we don't have anything solid from Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration on what their expectation is going to be or their requirement for us to be compliant and have a compliant test. Once we have all that figured out, then we'll certainly be coordinating with the school districts and the bus companies and all of our other third-party testing entities to ensure that everyone is administering the same test. That's the big thing is for the purposes of CDL licensure, the test that a prospective driver gets from a DMV employed examiner, a private for-profit third-party testing examiner, or an examiner in this school bus driver certification program, it should be as close to exactly the same as possible. So it shouldn't matter who that driver goes to, they should be getting the same test. And so it's really about uniformity and making sure that that test is really standardized and being administered the same way across the state from different testing entities.
And maybe some of the context that's come around this is there are additional changes coming motivated by federal regulations in 2020. Some of you may have heard about the entry-level driver training. They're looking at a federal standard for certification for that. You'll get more information about that later. That's not what today is about. But I bring it up because this is something that we're looking at the possibility that if someone gets a commercial driver license, not only can they drive a school bus, but they can also drive a straight truck, any other vehicle that their license covers. And because of that, we want to make sure that they're well equipped to pilot any vehicle they have the licensure to drive.
Thank you, guys. So what's not changing? ODE is going to continue to support all aspects of the school bus certification program, which is connected to but independent of DMV CDL skills testing.
And let's say that again, that's very important because not everyone remembers, even after someone goes out to get their commercial driver license, they may not remember which is which or that there are two. They should have all of them on them anytime they're driving, but a commercial driver license and a school bus certificate are both required, and they are two distinct pieces that you must have.
Correct. And along those lines, it's going to look and feel, I think, pretty similar to what it has in the past, which actually is a segue into the next slide. ODE is going to continue to provide skills test examiner training and support the examiner evaluation process, different training offerings throughout the year, and continued group evaluation processes at OSD with DMV evaluators. And as far as the evaluation process at OSD, most of you or some of you may know that we shifted the way that we conduct the evaluations in Oregon for examiners employed with school districts and bus companies. It used to be a couple years ago, and prior to that, you would get a visit from Bill Cohen. He'd come on site, he'd do your evaluation, he'd provide you his paperwork, and then you'd see him again in 2 years to do the same thing. While the 2-year requirement still exists, what we've done is we found some opportunities to kind of do mass evaluation sessions based out of Salem at Oregon School for the Deaf. So far, most of the feedback from that process has been pretty positive. And I think that the style under which we're conducting those evaluations is more conducive to actually learning and growing, which is really kind of the intent behind the evaluation process. Yeah. You want to add anything, Brock?
No, I think you got it pretty well covered.
Statewide test administration coverage. Some districts may not have the desired infrastructure to function as third-party testers or maintain their own skills test examiners. That was something that Bryce had hit on earlier. You know, depending upon the way you're structured and what sort of obligations and expenses are behind being a third-party testing organization, there may be some entities that don't want to do this anymore. And to the extent that we can, I think it's going to be really important to continue to work together to help support the needs of some of the outlying areas that may not have the interest in continuing this program through some of the ways that Bryce had alluded to with utilization of examiners from other bus companies and school districts. You want to elaborate at all?
Nope, I already jumped the gun on this one again. So
no, that's okay. That's okay. Looks like I'm doing it too. So statewide test administration coverage, some of the options that were alluded to earlier, and there may be some additional ones on the slide, paying another district or bus company for the use of their examiner to test your prospective drivers. And again, the note permissible only if certain conditions are met. And that's primarily that they have to be acting in direct line of their employment under the scope of their employment covered by their employer's coverages whether it be a public entity, self-insured entity, or someone who's covered by insurance. Those coverages have to be in effect for that person, as well as no direct compensation taking place where the examiner is receiving money for those services. Rather, the district or the bus company is potentially billing whatever the other district or bus company is. Examiners qualified in OD's program may take second jobs as skill test examiners with for-profit third-party testing businesses. This is another way we can do it. We're going to be having simultaneously running a CDL third-party testing procurement that's going to be coming up here very, very soon. And there will be opportunities for us to add more testing businesses, at which point some of those testing businesses may be looking for examiners to employ. So potential opportunity for employment there, again, provided it's okay with your current employer. Examiners qualified in OD's program may take second jobs by establishing their own third-party testing contract with DMV. What that looks like is you would then assume the role of a testing business, enter into contract with us as a for-profit testing business, and then all of those requirements, records, insurance coverages, all of those things would apply directly to you. Prospective school bus drivers may take their CDL skills test from a DMV examiner or qualified third-party examiner. This has always been an option. I know currently under that structure, there is a requirement for you to then test again to obtain the school bus certification piece, but that is another option that's there as well.
Yeah, and you folks had a chart up earlier kind of explaining the relationships. This is essentially the same chart. It looks a little bit different, but looking at the relationships that we have with you as our customers, the Department of Education, as we talked about, is working on driver training. Someone who wants to come in and drive a school bus for you will be trained by one of your personnel. CDL examiner training, we're still going to be offering the summer program that you've had before. So the third-party examiner class that happens in the summer for people to become either active or inactive examiners. If they become an inactive examiner, that just means that they're waiting until there's a space in the program that needs to be filled, and they can take that active role. But we'll still be offering the training for that in cooperation with DMV. Certification of school bus drivers. Again, the school bus certificate is something that still comes from ODE, and that's still a piece that you need to drive a school bus, and we'll be retaining control of that. The Oregon Department of Transportation and DMV, like they mentioned, are taking care of the interagency agreements and the request. What was it, RFP?
Request for proposal.
Request for proposal. I was right there, but I wasn't.
Actually, for the private bus companies, it's going to be a class special procurement.
That's right.
Not a competitive procurement, and we'll be getting some information out about how that works. If any of the representatives from the private bus companies don't understand that process, we'll be able to get that communication to you in plain language so you understand how that's going to play out.
Right. And so I show you this slide just to, again, kind of establish this is what our relationships looks like, and this is what we're responsible for when it comes to that process of getting your new drivers licensed and certified to drive a school bus in the state of Oregon. Again, this is that process, starting on one side with the new driver candidate and coming out on the other end with the approved driver on the job. Last time we did one of these webinars, we talked about the fact that it might look different for a large district than a small district to go through this process. The pieces of that might be different. You might work with different examiners. You might not have an examiner in-house. You might not have a trainer in-house. But all these pieces are essentially the same. And the specifics of that, both ODE and DMV are on hand to help you make sure you have those bases covered as you're guiding someone through this process of becoming a school bus driver. At this point, I'll turn it over to Candace. And Candace, if you want to scoot in just a little bit, we'll make sure we got you covered by the camera here. Again, introducing Candace as the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services. She's been here for 5 months now?
Yeah.
There we go. Good to have you. So I'll have you address the reasons maybe that someone as a small rural district might be interested in hosting an examiner through the DMV arrangement.
One of the options you have as a small district is to operate as the fiscal agent or the operator for the third-party exam. If you enter into a contract with DMV in that, you can recoup some of the process, some of the dollars that you're going to spend in that by contracting with your area, your rural partners, either through some just memorandums of understanding that you can work out with your local districts, or if you have charter schools in the area that are also going to contract that. So the department right now can provide technical assistance and what that would look like, and we can work with your business office and your superintendents to develop plans of how to meet the requirements both for DMV and then also to ensure that you're recouping enough of the fiscal cost to make that worthwhile.
All right, thank you. And for anybody who was unaware, I think everyone should be at this point, but Sarah Drinkwater formerly held the title of Director of Student Transfer or Pupil Transportation here at the state level, and that's the title you now hold. So if anybody hasn't been introduced to you, here you are. And I think at this point we're going to go to questions. I've got contact information. I'm the Operations and Policy Analyst here at the Department of Education, so if you have questions down the road, please submit those to me. I'm happy to help you find an answer. I like having answers better than not having answers, so make sure that you get in touch if you have a question. On the other side, I've got your contact info up there, Bryce. I think I'll have Nick's at the end as well, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll make sure that if you have questions, again, both of us are working in a cooperative relationship to make sure you have your bases covered, because our ultimate goal is to make sure that you can staff your operations with the drivers you need to be successful offering the services that you do. At this point, we'll go to questions that have come in through our remote attendees. So Flo, you've got a couple, or Kylie, are you taking care of that?
Yeah.
Okay, and let me, before you start, if anybody does have questions and they haven't submitted them yet, make sure that you send those our way so that we can get to them. I also wanted to say thank you to Flo and Kylie, who are here in the room, Shauna, who had to step out, and Mary, who had to step out, who are helping us with the technical end. Technology is difficult to use, and we appreciate their help immensely. That's the reason that that we can talk to you today the way we are. So what do we have queued up for questions, Kylie?
At this point, we only have one question.
All right.
It's regarding getting a copy of the PowerPoint presentation from today.
Copy of the PowerPoint presentation. We can make sure that you have access to that. We will also be archiving this session, and the last session that we had in January on the 22nd is also currently available through the Department of Education YouTube channel so that we can get that shared with you. Again, if you would like a link to that, make sure you send an inquiry to me at the email address that you can see on the screen. So if there are any other questions, Kylie, let me know. Question from the room here.
Bryce, you kind of touched on this, and I felt like it was a significant situation, significant thought that if we could make sure we're kind of clear on today. If an operation has examiners in them and they're functioning as a transportation contractor, which is your kind of your special group, and we have a district who is functioning as a contract with you, are both doors open for anybody to come in and have that operation test one?
So the question, just repeating for those who aren't here, is the door open for anyone to come and use the services of an examiner employed either by a private company or a district?
So are you referring to, so if we have a school district, are you referring to like someone who is not a prospective school bus driver coming in and taking a test from an examiner in that program?
No.
Or you're referring to
I'm going to put some names with it. Maybe that'll help.
Okay.
We have an operation that's run by a first student.
Oh, okay.
Okay. We have an operation run by a local school district that's in the area. They don't have an examiner. Are they going to have the ability to send them over to first student for a test?
And just for the audience out in the world, can someone from a school district send one of their employees to a company like First Student for testing?
Absolutely. I mean, once again, it's kind of that if certain conditions are met kind of thing.
Right.
So
I realize we got a lot of
yeah.
water, but is that what you're envisioning?
Yeah. So what we can't have happening is a school district entering into an intergovernmental agreement with us and then subcontracting their test administration to this private entity. We cannot have that.
Right.
So in other words, if the school district is not going to be employing an examiner, but they are contracting with First Student to provide their pupil transportation and have their skills testing and all that kind of stuff, then it would just be, our relationship is just directly then with First Student, right? So, and if first student has multiple geographic areas they function in and provide services for across the state, we only need one contract with them. Obviously, we're not going to need one for each geographic area. So we'll have one contract with first student under the class special procurement, and with that, their examiners can provide tests wherever, right? And then they can bill this school district, that school district, whatever, for the use of their employee to administer tests for those various geographic areas. So there doesn't need to be any kind of fence around that. Once again, as long as they're doing it under their employment for an entity that is under agreement or contract with us. Do you need to provide any clarification there?
I think you captured that perfectly.
So does that answer your question sufficiently? Okay.
It sounds like you don't want middlemen. So if someone wants to use another entity for testing, examination of their prospective employees, then you don't need them to step in between. You can have that relationship from DMV to that company or district directly.
Yeah, so two reasons. One, federal regulations don't permit it. And two, we lose some control over, and not that we're control freaks, but it makes the oversight of the program much more difficult. It adds a layer of complexity and entanglement that makes it tougher for us to maintain integrity in this program, and integrity and the safety of, the highway safety impacts and the integrity of the program are exceptionally important, particularly since ever since we brought Nick into this program as a first policy analyst and a compliance specialist, he has, depending on your perspective, done a bang-up job or done a really pain-in-the-neck job of rooting out a lot of inappropriate testing practices. So for our purposes, we think it's great, right? Because there was a lot of testing activity that was not compliant with state and federal regulations that was potentially putting unsafe drivers out on the road. And Nick was able to identify a lot of that, and we were able to make a lot of testing entities, he was able to make a lot of testing entities go away who ought not to have been administering tests and needed to be no longer doing this work because they were cutting corners and not running their testing practice very ethically. And once again, to ensure the integrity of the program, we need to make sure that we have sufficient oversight and controls over what's happening and how the tests are being administered, because ultimately, if we're accountable to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, we're accountable to the legislature and the governor for CDL skills test administration. So if something goes sideways in this program, it's going to be ODOT and DMV that has to answer for that. So we have to try to do everything we can to make sure that the program is functioning as it should.
And with all the complexities of this situation, it's probably easy to get lost in some of the threads and how it all ties together. But the end goal of compliance is safety, and the rules are here for a reason. We're here to make sure that no one gets hurt and no one is put in danger because of things that happen the wrong way. So that's the reason that both DMV and ODE are here administering the things that we do. And ultimately that leads to not only successful drivers in your operation, but also safe transport of the students that we care for every day to and from school. Were there any other questions, Kylie?
We do have a couple. Do we need to provide all names to the trainers or just the one address? We have multiple sites across the state, so we can just use our corporate office address for all of our locations.
And it sounds like that's a question from someone at a contracting company, school bus business, asking whether they need multiple people. And I think you already addressed that you just want one relationship with a company operating in Oregon.
That is correct. So we would have a direct relationship with the company itself. As far as the testing business is concerned, if there's a central office or a headquartered location, yes. And then that company then would have test administration through their employees that are all across the state. So yeah, it's one relationship.
So there's going to be some efficiency and some simplicity that is going to come out of the what is done in the future as well. Nick had a brilliant idea, which I thought was fantastic, in that one of the things that we're required to do under federal motor carrier safety regulations is records inspections. So not just conducting the examiner evaluations to make sure the examiners are properly administering tests, but we're supposed to be inspecting records as well of the testing entities. And the core records, the primary records, can be uploaded into the Commercial Skills Test Information Management System, the application that Nick referred to earlier that AMVA maintains that examiners have to schedule and enter skills test results into. Well, if those documents like the score sheet and a copy of the driver's commercial learner permit, what was the other one?
Copy of the CLP, copy of the DL, and a copy of the score sheet. Oh, and test fee receipt.
So if all those are uploaded into systems, a lot of the records inspection work can be done remotely. So Nick or one of his other compliance specialists can just pull those records up and do the records inspection through systems. That doesn't mean that the third-party testing entities don't have to also maintain other records, because they certainly do. Like they have to maintain a copy of the testing agreement, because that's required under federal regulations. They have to maintain a copy of the background or criminal background check for their examiners and their representatives in the program. The proof of their insurance and surety bond, all those types of things have to be maintained as well. So, we still will have these potential random on-site inspections and audits to make sure that the testing entities are maintaining all the records they are required to. But once again, a lot of that records inspection process will be able to be done online, which will be much more convenient for both the testing entities and us.
We live in the future and stuff can just go through the air.
Yeah.
All right.
If we use another district's third-party tester, can we have them use a test route in our district instead of their district's test route?
So the question is, if I understand it correctly, can an examiner use multiple test routes?
So,
No, can you read it again?
Yeah, so test routes, if we use another district's third-party tester, can we have them use a test route in our district instead of their district's test route?
That's the question.
So that's a good question. So routes are connected to the testing business themselves, not the examiners. Meaning, if you were to be employed through a district and want to use the route of another district or private bus company, that route would actually have to be approved for your district or bus company. So technically, no. The travel aspect and how that works, we're okay with prospective drivers going to examiners and examiners going to drivers. But if you're an approved testing business, whether it be a bus company or a school district, your examiners are only permitted to administer tests on your approved routes.
But as a testing business, if you want to establish routes in different geographic locations, you certainly can.
Absolutely.
All right.
And that's it for now.
All right, and that's it. So in that case, again, I'll refer you to our contact information that we've got on the screen. I'm here at ODE. Bryce and Nick are over at DMV. If you've got questions, we want to make sure that you get the answers that you need. So please be sure to be in touch. It is Valentine's Day, and I do want to say thank you. We love you. We appreciate the hard work that you do. Thank you for being here. I intended to distribute these to you, but some of you are not here, so I will keep a small amount of them on me when I appear at various school bus functions in the next month. And if I still have some, you can ask me for them. Thank you again for your time today. We want to make sure that we support you as best we can. And so again, be in touch as you have need. Thanks again to our technical team, to Flo and Kylie over here, Shauna and Mary who helped us set up today. Thank you, Candace, for being here. And thank you, Bryce and Nick, for being here as well.
Thanks for having us.
Yep, thanks.
All right. And we will talk to you soon. Thank you.